All right, we're back live at the NSCA Conference in Orlando, Florida, the 2015 edition. We have the pleasure of talking with Dr. Bryan Mann, who is a strength coach at University of Missouri, as well as a professor in the physical therapy department. Bryan, I wanted to start by letting you give a little bit of your background to our viewers, and then we can move into talking a little bit about your use of technology around velocity-based training.
Sounds good. My background, I started actually in 1999 with Southwest Missouri State under a guy named Rick Perry, who's now the assistant with Chicago Bears. Worked my way up there, and he had a bunch of books, and I started reading those, and I saw these different numbers from like Roman, R.A. Roman, Yuri Verkhoshansky, and guys like that. And he just, told me, hey, I got all these books, read them. So I did. Then I, bounced around a little bit. I was at University of Tulsa as an intern under Pat Ivey, Arizona State under Joe Kinn, and in 2004 I went to Missouri. Started out as a graduate assistant, and I just continued my education through there. So I got a second master's and a PhD at University of Missouri, and been with just about every program there at some point. In 2012, I adopted a dual role to where I am a assistant professor in the Department of Physical Therapy, 75%, and then 25% I am assistant director of strength conditioning, and I currently work with the throws at the University of Missouri.
And so I know one of the areas especially is velocity-based training. What got you into kind of that area of focus, and then how have you started to implement that or brought that into your philosophy when you're training athletes?
Yeah, so how it actually all started was whenever I was reading the manuals that Rick had from the 1960s and 70s in the Soviet Union with, like I said, R.A. Roman, the training and management of the weightlifter. There were Fundamentals of Special Strength Training and Sport by Yuri Verkhoshansky, the old Sport Ivany Press books that were, the kind of rough translations. And I happened to notice that there was these things that were, some numbers, and it was some speeds. It was like something meters per second for this exercise or that exercise, or for this trade and for that trade. And I just kind of filed it in the back of my mind. It's like, well, this is interesting. I don't know what the heck it's talking about, but this is interesting. So then we happened to go in 2001 or 2002. 2000. No, it's 2000. We happened to go up to Westside Barbell. And Louis Simmons that month had actually just put out an article in Powerlifting USA about the Tendo unit. And so we happened to look at it, and we were, I'm like, oh, meters per second. Well, that's what it's talking about. So as soon as we got back to SMS, Rick ordered one, and we started playing around with it. And I started pulling all the speeds that we had seen previously, and I started incorporating those. So we looked at things for Olympic lifts. We looked at things for different traits like strength, speed strength, accelerative strength. And we really started implementing it at Missouri at about 2007-ish, 2006, 2007, somewhere around in there. Kind of funny story that if people have seen me talk, they've heard this story before, that we, obviously for a PhD program, you got to do a lot of stats classes. And I had a semester to do a mini thesis, 25-page paper done on something that you knew something about and you actually cared about, so it wouldn't just be painful. So I wrote this entire 25-page, so I'm a procrastinator. I'm horrible about procrastinating. You can ask my wife, she is mad at me all the time for procrastinating. And I decided that, I'm starting this doctoral program. I just started my first full-time position, with women's basketball. I'm going to be traveling whenever this paper's due. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write everything now about how the clean is related to the vertical jump. Improvements in clean equal improvements in power as produced by a vertical jump. Because, speed strength is what it's developed through an Olympic lift. And then an expression of speed strength is a vertical jump, explosive power. So they should be, highly related. So let's just go ahead and let's do that. So I write 25-page paper, leave gaps in there to fill in the stats. And whenever I finally learn how to do the backward stepwise regression analysis, I run it. As soon as we learn it, I have my little thumb drive, and I went over to the computer lab, the stats lab, to be able to run it. I didn't want to have you've got it, completely understand it. You wake up in the morning, it's gone. I didn't want to risk that because I already wrote the 25-page paper. And I go in, I sit down, and I run the data. And I must have not known it as well as I thought I did, because I found that there was no relationship. So then I call up a friend of mine who is far smarter than I am. And I'm like, hey, would you help me with this? I think I did something wrong. And she looks at everything, and she runs it and finds the same thing. And I think, well, clearly you're not as smart as I think you are. So I go to Dr. Osterland, who is the stats professor with degrees from, I believe, it's Stanford, Princeton, and Yale. The guy is, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, oh my gosh, holy cow, he's absolutely brilliant. And he sits down with me, and we look to make sure I coded everything correctly. And then he looks and, make sure that I ran everything correctly. And he ran it himself and found the exact same thing, that for our guys, there was absolutely no relationship between clean and vertical jump. There was none. Nothing at all. It was squat and body composition. So I bring that to Coach Ivy, and I'm like, hey, why do we do cleans? Actually, I said, what is our test of explosive strength? It was this vertical jump. So, well, why do we do cleans? Develop speed, to develop explosive strength. So our cleans should be related to our vertical jumps then, right? Is that what you're saying? I knew it was a bad day to ask him. He was in a bad mood, and he, was like, why are you asking me so many stupid questions for? Yeah, but I had to travel, so, I knew that I needed to get it done then. And like, well, I got the stats that says that they're not related. He goes, well, you ran the stats wrong. Dr. O ran the stats. Like, all right, well, I got to listen. So we sat down and we looked at everything. And I told Coach Ivy about the Tendo unit, and we had gotten that, and we threw it on the barbell. And I knew at that point that the guys for a mean velocity, peak velocity was not a capability at the time. This is, gosh, it might have been 2005. Peak velocity was not a capability that any of the systems had at that time. And they were moving the bar, supposed to be moving the bar to mean velocity to a minimum of 1.5 meters per second. The guy that we threw it on there, and the several guys that we threw it on there that day, on their cleans, they were standing it up with it at 0.6 meters per second. Now we know that all training is governed by the specific adaptations to impose the man's principle. So we are expecting this adaptation of speed strength. Now the demand that we were imposing on it at 0.6 meters per second, if you look at some of my work, you would see it's accelerative strength. And I would argue that for the clean and the amplitude of motion, that it's actually, that's like absolute strength. And that's obviously not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get this explosive strength thing. And it was just, we were kind of wishing in one hand, pooping in the other, and seeing which one filled up first. So then we got a few of the units to measure velocity, and we, all of a sudden, the next year, the guys that were improving on their cleans whenever we did it by velocity, well, then there was a relationship with the vertical jump. So, it just, at that point, it was like, hey, we need this feedback. And, so it kind of revolutionized the way that we trained the athletes and how we implement it now. Like, for instance, with my throwers, is that for all their Olympic lifts, they have a minimum threshold velocity. So if they do not meet this minimum velocity to complete the Olympic lift, it's the same as if they couldn't get it up to their shoulders, they couldn't knock it out overhead. It doesn't count. It was a zero. So every repetition that they do is locked into that point, right? So it ends up having what's the best way to call this? An accumulation of a higher quality of load, right? A higher quality training. And plus simply just even getting the feedback in, and this is something that I kind of noticed on my own, is that whenever you just give people feedback, you give them a number, you give them a score, what do they start doing? They start competing. So, they get feedback so they understand how they did. Then they try and do better the next set. And then they're always jack-jawing with each other like, hey, well, I beat you. Well, I got you. I'm whooping you today. And it gets extremely competitive. And there was a study by Randall et al. That looked at the effects of instantaneous velocity feedback on performance in a 6-week training cycle. It was a Journal of Strength and Conditioning research article from like 2013, 2014, somewhere around there. And what they had found was they had two groups. They did every set, rep, weight the same. When the guys were coming in, the subjects came in, they were the same strength. So there was no differences there. They lifted the same load, same sets, same reps. So you would expect the same results. The only difference was that one group received the feedback of how fast they moved every time, and the other group did not. And at the end of the 6 weeks, there was a huge increase in speed and power and change of direction ability in the group that received the feedback and nothing else, versus not. Yeah, so it's that competition that's going on. They get a higher accumulation of the quality of training, and it's just leading to a higher transfer of training. So just simply from giving feedback, you get better results. And then beyond that, we also break things down by trait. So we've got different traits. So we've got absolute strength, which is, if you're looking at a traditional periodization scheme, you're looking at about that 80, 85% and up, right? And velocity-wise, that's 0.5 meters per second and below for what I call a traditional lift. And by traditional lift, I mean like squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, whatever, versus Olympic weightlifting, which that's a whole different beast. And I could go into that, we could end up being here for like 3 hours. Obviously I get excited about velocity. The next trait that we look at would be accelerative strength, which whenever people hear that, and maybe this is, I've stuck with the stuff that I got from Roman and Verkoshansky and Bosco, right? So I'm going to pay homage to the people, the pioneers who blazed the trail. I'm not coming up with my own nomenclature. And maybe it's a rough translation or something, but it's called accelerative strength. And a lot of people think, well, it's going to improve my sprint speed down the track. Well, not really, because what it is it's accelerating through a load. So think about an offensive and a defensive lineman firing off and trying to dominate the other. Then the next trait that we look at is strength speed, which is strength in conditions of speed, which is moving a semi-heavy weight as fast as possible. And that starts getting onto the, if you actually look at the inverted U power curve, right, force velocity curves, it's you can cut it right down the middle. On the left half is strength speed, on the right half is speed strength. They're two independent traits that influence the same outcome, right? So it's a strength dominated by speed. And then the next trait coming up, obviously, is speed strength, which is a lighter weight, fast, and it's a high rate of force development. So the speed strength kind of more on the neural side, where the strength speed is, neuromuscular, and hitting the muscular system. Beyond that, we've got starting strength, which is the ability to rapidly overcome inertia from a dead stop. So, and you're looking at about 1.3 meters per second on up, depending on the amplitude of motion. And those are all mean velocities or average velocities, depending on what unit you've got. You've got push strength, the Cesta Performs, Bar Sensei, obviously Gym Aware, which I think is the Cadillac of everything, or Rolls Royce. It's more expensive, but you get what you pay for. It's an amazing piece of equipment. But you breaking things down into those categories, and with that starting strength, the rapidly overcoming inertia, man, it's just. That's the way that we break things down. And we'll know at different times of the year you want to work on different things, just like with your traditional periodization scheme. So basically all we're doing is replacing a percentage of 1RM with a velocity. And you want to do that because there is a near perfect relationship between velocity and percentage of 1RM. There was a Gonzalez-Badillo study with him and Sanchez Medina that came out, and they found an R squared of 0.98. And so what that means is that it predicts, for 98% of the people, it works out like this, that for every 5 percentage block, 98% of their subjects were plus or minus 0.04 on a certain speed. So for instance, the one that I can always remember is 60% was 0.8 meters per second, okay? So everybody, whenever they move 60% of their 1RM at maximal intended velocity, so they're pushing it as fast as they can, they were 0.8 meters per second.
So when you have an athlete who is lifting 60% of their 1RM, even if they can do it, you're not going to progress them further if it's not faster than
Exactly. And so a lot of times I just replace I don't even look at the percentages anymore. Because if you look at some studies, there's a paper by Jovanovic that came out, and he followed some rugby guys through the season. And you can predict 1RM by velocity. And its R squared is up at about 0.99. 99% of the time, just your velocity will tell you exactly what the load is, just like it's working through the same concepts as I just spoke about. And what he did was he had a velocity predicted 1RM. And if you look at the chart, I probably should have printed it out so I could hold it up for the camera. It would make more sense. But they had a previously tested 1RM that they tested before the season. And then they put on there the predicted 1RM based off of velocity for any given session. Some days in the in-season, their 1RM, their actual 1RM, their predicted from velocity 1RM was up 30 kilos over that previously tested load. Some days it was down 20 kilos. So that's a huge variation. And anybody who's done strength training, there's days they come in there and they start with the bar like, oh yeah, this is going to be a good day. And there other days they come in there, it's like, man, did somebody slip like 2 plates on each side? Well, that's because that's what you've got that day, right? It goes back to that, we could talk about other technology like, talk to Andrew Flatt or something about HRV and looking at the readiness and preparedness stuff. But it's just a marker of what you've got in the tank that day, right? So all that I'm looking at doing is simply replacing those percentages with the velocities because you're training the person for that day, for that set.
So do you require a certain amount of consistency in the ability to achieve that percentage? So if I do it one day, are you going to move me to the next heavier weight and see if I can, achieve the objective from a percentage standpoint then, or do you need them to do that for 3 consecutive days, for example, before you progress them on the next heavier weight?
That's one way that you could absolutely do it. The way that I do it is I just know what I'm trying to develop, and I just go with that velocity. So like if I'm wanting to develop strength speed, I'm looking at 0.75 to 1.0 meters per second. I assign a speed. They keep all of their sets right around that. So I'm not so much worried about the progression, because what I'm actually getting is I'm getting a marker of readiness from their lift, from their workout. I do no extra technology, take no extra time, and I'm getting to see where the athlete is that day. So yeah, I'm looking at it for what it is, for what they're able to do that day, and also kind of track them over time. If I see 2 or 3 weeks in a row that we're supposed to do the same speed and their weight's coming down, what is that indicative of? That they're overstressed, that they're overreached, that we might need to back off. I got a paper that's just recently accepted into the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research talking about the effects of academic stress on injuries in Division I football. And we see that whenever they are stressed from a different source, they get hurt. So, this is a way to actually back off wherever you can back off and know exactly how much to back them off with what you're already doing.
So I know you're a man who loves research. You publish research and do your own.
Right.
What was it about GymAware when you looked at everything else out there that caused you to, because you were a long time Tendo guy?
Yeah, I used Tendo for a long time. And with GymAware, there's a few things. One is with the linear position transducer. Typically, you have to have a completely vertical. It's got to be straight up and down, right? Because what it's measuring is the change of distance over the change in time, okay? With the GymAware, you had less error because it's got an x-axis correction, right? And then we've also got things, looking at it was the back end of stuff too. Well, another thing that really turned me onto it was that we had the x-axis correction, just talked about that, and it was the saving everything to the cloud. So all of my data immediately goes there. I don't have to write anything down. So that was another thing. But then whenever I looked at the server and saw the amount of information that we were getting, it was just completely unreal. So we got force, work, velocity, power, mean, peak, concentric, eccentric. We had all the distances. We had the acceleration curves, the deceleration curves. The amount of information that I got from not changing anything up was just amazing. The reliability and the validity studies that had come out on it were second to none. You could not even question the integrity of the device. It was, and I took a long time to decide. I sat on it for probably 8 months of just deciding, do I even really want to get this and take a look at it? And whenever I got it, and there's some data that we've collected with it, I'm kicking myself in the butt with wishing that I would have done it sooner. There's been so many times that you do one thing and you do it for so long, and then you think, well, maybe there's something a little bit better. There's something a little different. Maybe I want to look at X instead of Y. Well, with the previous devices where you had to write everything down by hand, you had to start over. Well, with the GymAware, if I decide one day that I want to start looking at force instead of velocity, I've got all that data. I don't have to go back and redo anything. I've got everything that I've already collected. So that's something else that was just amazing for it. It allows the coach and the researcher to really get on the same page, because if all the coach cares about is velocity and feedback, that's great, okay? Bottom line, you look at Randall, that's all you need. All you need is feedback, and you're going to get better results out of your program from what you're already doing now. And then the researcher can look and go deeper into it and see what is happening, right? What is going on with the athlete on a physiological or neuromuscular or autonomic nervous system balance? What is happening from that end? And that, this technology just allows so much more to go into and come out of the athletic training with no additional input.
Dr. Mann, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. I know you're a busy man, and I think that we're getting ready to shut down here. So, all right. Well, this has been David Harris with Strength Performance Network with Dr. Bryan Mann from University of Missouri. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Sorry, I got